Hello everybody, and welcome to what is likely to be the first video in a brand new series I am titling Realm Reviews. I'm at a point now where I want to start taking a more thoughtful, honest, and critical look at a lot of the games that I'm currently playing, and especially the newer release titles. So what better title to start with for the very first episode than the latest release from Xbox Game Studios and Compulsion Games, South of Midnight. Some of you might know that this was one of my most anticipated games of 2025. Anytime it was shown off, my head perked up because this game had a lot going for it, at least for me personally. It looked like a callback to simpler times, a third-person action platformer with a linear gameplay and story structure, evocative of games that I grew up playing, like Sly Cooper and Jak and Daxter, while coming from a team who only had 2 prior projects under their belt, in the fairly well-received Contrast and We Happy Few. But now, with a AAA level budget, production quality, and more than 6 years of development thanks to the resources provided by Microsoft, after Compulsion was acquired by Xbox in 2018. After Hellblade 2 and Avowed's rather lukewarm reception, this was another first-party Xbox game that had something to prove and show that Compulsion Games could be a strong fixture within the house of Xbox Game Studios. So, did they stick the landing? Well, aside from some very repetitive combat and a narrative that seems to want to race to the finish line as opposed to taking its time, South of Midnight provides an experience that truly immerses you in a gothic and beautifully twisted version of the American South in ways no other game can provide. Now, my personal review scale that I'm going to be using in terms of what metrics would be easily readable and digestible and make sense to me and hopefully to you guys is going to be letter grades. And I'll be using these for a few reasons. One is just that I really don't like denominating a game with a numbered score. It just doesn't feel right to me. It kind of just devalues it in a certain sense. For games or any other piece of media in general. Number 2, I think that grading games on a letter scale can do a lot to kind of help differentiate my reviews and the way that I'm reviewing games, and also just to kind of help differentiate my reviews from other content creators on the platform. And then finally, number 3, I think that I'm still able to recommend games within a certain area of the scale. So for example, any game that falls between a B- to an A+, which is the highest possible grade that a game could receive on my scale, although that is still likely to change as I try and figure out the way that I want to explain and elaborate on this review system a little bit. It is still very much a work in progress. Like I said, this will be the first of many videos to come in the future. Ultimately, the scale is likely to look something like this, where a game can fall anywhere between an F-, the lowest score, all the way up to an A+, or what I consider, once again, an A+ to be as close to perfect a score as possible. So if you enjoyed this review and you find it helpful in helping you to decide whether South of Midnight is a game you want to pick up and play or try out for yourself, definitely consider leaving a like on this video. It's going to help out a lot. Leave a comment with your thoughts down below once the review is finished and your own thoughts on South of Midnight. And with that out of the way, let's talk about South of Midnight.
My salvation.
Okay, now we gotta start with the artistic design of South of Midnight because, oh my god, this game is a marvel to look at. The excellent use of light and shadow, the wide range of colors, especially if you're using high dynamic range, and the environments and character models all come to life in spectacular fashion. For reference, I played the game on my PC in ultra-wide resolution at 1440p, and I did have HDR settings enabled for the first chunk of the game. And let me just say, I find most games with high dynamic range settings to be very lacking in terms of how effectively it is used, but South of Midnight might be the only game I've played that uses high dynamic range in such a way that it really does visually enhance your experience by bringing out the best in the game's expansive color palette. By now, many of you have likely noticed that South of Midnight's art style and animation is directly influenced by stop-motion film techniques that have been used to popular effect in movies like The Nightmare Before Christmas and Coraline, among many others. Here, in South of Midnight, the stop-motion effect gives the game an unnatural feeling, further adding to that supernatural mystique of the setting and narrative. Some of the character models even have that little fingerprint marking on them, similar to how stop-motion puppets are constantly being touched and moved around by human hands, frame by frame, which is an amazing and also really easy to miss detail. Furthermore, the character models and creatures all have that hand-sculpted look to them with sharp and exaggerated features, almost reminding me of some of the work Arcane Studios did for the Dishonored series, which, as all of you know, I just eat that stuff up. The creature designs in particular are a real standout, with many of the most popular entities from Southern folklore given a unique artistic vision by the Compulsion team. Compulsion's depiction of the American South is also a wonder to behold, and as someone who was raised very close to the vicinity of the Deep South, I can tell you that they have unequivocally nailed the vibe and atmosphere of this unique and culturally distinctive area that very few games often choose to represent. From the swampy bayous and rundown shacks to the farmlands, dense forests, and Appalachian-esque mountain peaks, every corner of this world is filled with incredible attention to detail. Compulsion have made it known on many occasions that they really put a ton of effort into creating a genuine sense of authenticity, a feeling that this is both the stereotypically idealized American South as well as the American South that is steeped in dark and oftentimes uncomfortable historical truths. South of Midnight might honestly be the best representation of the American South that we have seen thus far in the games industry, and every aspect of the game's visual design proves that Compulsion's time spent researching and crafting this unique vision of the Deep South was well spent, because this can absolutely be used as an example of why games are considered to be a genuine form of art and human expression. The narrative of South of Midnight is centered around Hazel Flood, a young high school track star growing up in the fictional town of Prospero, who, after tragedy strikes, discovers that she is a weaver, a powerful magic wielder that has control over the very fabric of life itself. You encounter a vast collection of colorful characters on your journey, as well as mythical creatures inspired by Southern folklore. Infamous tall tales of monstrous beings like Two-Toed Tom, the Rougarou, and Huggin' Molly come to life in South of Midnight and provide Compulsion with an interesting avenue to discuss the game's most important themes, those being the idea of healing the generational trauma and grief of many of the people residing in Prospero, including Hazel's own family. As a weaver, Hazel's ultimate destiny is to help heal and mend the wounds in the world around her that manifest as stigma, usually caused by some sort of severely traumatic event that bleeds into the surrounding area, causing monstrous creatures known as haints to appear and stalk the landscape in perpetual suffering. We'll talk more about those in the gameplay section. When Hazel does cure and heal the stigma, the world around her changes as nature returns to reclaim the environment, bringing bringing back the sense of earthly beauty where there was once only ugliness and despair. The visual feedback from this is actually one of my favorite small details in South of Midnight. Each chapter of the game's story focuses on a different form of trauma that is oftentimes linked to the previously mentioned mythical creatures, and let me tell you, these stories can be messed up. One in particular that I won't spoil too much was very difficult for me to sit through, as I am a parent of one child already with another on the way, and, well, I'll just leave it at that. Exploring the origins of how these creatures came to be is a often depressing and winding rabbit hole into the darkest parts of humanity, and reminds us of the horrors that humans are so often capable of. The way that Compulsion delve into this history, though, particularly in the way it relates to the background of oppression and slavery in the Deep South, is handled with an exceptional amount of respect and tact. While the story of South of Midnight is frequently dark in tone, it ultimately is a story of mending past traumas and finding a way to accept them, but also to move past them. In this way, it's a hopeful story that's about accepting your past and rising above it, and it's not every day we see a major game release like this that tackles such important issues with a real feeling of sincerity. Hazel as a character is written fairly well, and her character arc manages to wrap itself up in a way that feels somewhat fulfilling. Although, if Compulsion were to make a sequel to this game, there's certainly room for improvement and further exploration of her character, because they really do just barely scratch the surface. In fact, the same could be said of the entire overarching story of South of Midnight. It feels like with all of the time Compulsion spent developing this game, remember, they spent 6 years on this game, that the characters and the story should feel more fleshed out by the time the credits roll, but they really aren't. And that's unfortunate. Many of the side characters that seemed so intriguing, like the talking catfish or the guitar-playing Shaken Bones featured in the game's reveal trailer, are not properly explored here, or in many cases, not explored at all. There's a ton of questions that are raised throughout the course of the story, but only a few of them are answered in any definitive way. Even more are left open either to the player's own interpretation or to never be addressed again, which I do want to stress, I am okay sometimes with unanswered questions. It just feels like there's a little bit too much ambiguity in this story. All of this left me with the feeling that the story of South of Midnight, while still good for the most part, can be very disjointed in terms of its pacing, as it almost seems like the game is rushing you through from chapter to chapter to reach the end, not taking nearly enough time, in my opinion, to slow down and really soak in the journey itself. The ending to the game is wholly anticlimactic in the way that it seemed to tease a longer epilogue, but instead, nope, just cut to black and we'll get to the credits. That's how the game ends. The themes and messaging of South of Midnight's story, Hazel's evolution from brash young woman to skilled weaver, and the great voice acting performances are what will ultimately stick with me the most after having finished the game. But aside from that, the story of South of Midnight I personally found to be mostly underwhelming. What I can safely say was not underwhelming was this game's soundtrack, which is incredible. The score for South of Midnight is so inspired and different from anything else I have ever heard in a game before. Olivier de Riviere, the composer behind games such as Dying Light 2 and the A Plague Tale series, has crafted a masterful collection of Southern-inspired ballads, with strong inspiration being pulled from many of the genres that originated in the American South. Blues, jazz, bluegrass music, and also a fair bit of your more traditional orchestral elements. What makes the music so unique in South of Midnight is how it becomes an integral part of telling the story. It does this by introducing a particular piece of music that slowly builds in tension and momentum as a chapter progresses, usually in the form of a very creepy children's choir. before culminating in a boss fight track that will literally outline the origin of each creature as you fight them, but in musical form. Something that I don't think I have ever seen a game attempt before, let alone in the way that South of Midnight does it. The American Deep South has intrinsic ties to music and music culture, and the way it's been captured here is nothing short of dazzling. Honestly, the overall audio design and audio mixing in South of Midnight does a ton of heavy lifting to truly immerse you in this setting and the stories of myth and legend that you experience. The way that spectral whispers will speak to Hazel, guiding her along her path, to the screeching and haunting groans of the enemies you face, to the songs of nature and natural wildlife that you encounter. They all blend together to make a cohesive soundscape that is unlike anything you've heard before. I would strongly urge you that even if you haven't been convinced to play South of Midnight by the time you reach the end of this video, you should, at the bare minimum, take a listen to the official soundtrack and enjoy it for everything it's worth. It is true artistry. Some of the songs they made here are real earthworms. They stick in your head long after you've finished playing. They certainly did for me. Now, the act of actually playing South of Midnight is the one aspect of the game that I saved here for the end, because truly, there isn't really a whole lot I can say. Which is not necessarily a bad thing. There are plenty of things to enjoy here. For one, I really enjoyed the exploration and platforming, even though it is incredibly simplistic by design. I won't lie, it's probably because the game woke my nostalgia for the third-person platformers of bygone days that I grew up playing. On its own terms, though, the platforming in South of Midnight is just incredibly basic, and the exploration gives you the illusion of freedom, like you're traveling off the beaten path, when in reality, all you need to do is click a button to show the route to your current objective. And once that route is visible, just go in the opposite direction, and you'll find collectibles and the upgrade currency known as floofs. Hazel also has access to a small companion character known as Crouton, a ragdoll that can be thrown out and remotely controlled to explore out-of-reach areas for secrets and to open pathways for Hazel. This little guy is adorable, by the way. I need one. I want one. Compulsion. Are you listening? When does he go on sale? Now we get to what is easily the weakest and most disappointing aspect of South of Midnight, and that is the very repetitive and shallow combat system. When playing through a chapter, you encounter these clearly marked arenas that lock you in until you defeat all of the enemies contained inside. The Haints that I previously mentioned in the story section are your main combat adversaries, but the variety of enemies is remarkably low. There's only, maybe about like 5 enemy types across the entirety of this game. You have your quick-footed enemies that close the gap fast and strike at close range. You have enemies that attack from a distance that spew projectiles, hulking brutes with a massive health bar, an enemy that shields other enemies, and that's pretty much it. Hazel uses her Weaver tools in combat to complete basic combos and finishers, along with a small collection of special abilities that allow Hazel to push the Haints away for breathing room, pull them in close for an attack, lock them in place for crowd control purposes, or throw Crouton to possess them, forcing them to fight amongst themselves. The character upgrades you can purchase using the collectible floofs I mentioned earlier do help to empower you and make the combat marginally more engaging, but the combat systems and mechanics are incredibly thin and lacking any real sense of depth and progression. South of Midnight is not a long game to complete either. It took me about, I think, 12 hours to go from beginning to end, and by the time you've gotten past maybe hour 3 or 4, you have seen pretty much everything the game has to offer at that point, and that encompasses everything. The combat, the platforming, and the exploration. The one saving grace of the combat in particular are the boss fights against the mythical creatures, which require much more attentiveness and skill on the part of the player, and on top of that are fantastic set piece moments with a real sense of scale and spectacle. These are very obviously the encounters that the team at Compulsion put the most effort and care into, but all in all, the overarching gameplay design of South of Midnight is left wanting, and I can only hope that for Compulsion's next game that they really do try to focus more on designing more engaging and challenging gameplay systems, because just like with what I mentioned in the story section with Hazel's character development, I feel like there's plenty of room for improvement and innovation here if Compulsion were to develop a sequel to this game. And that is really where I would like to end this review on. Despite all of the flaws inherent here in South of Midnight, the pros definitely outweighed the cons, at least for me personally, and I found myself just having a really good time playing and honestly just experiencing this world and this setting. And I really do want Compulsion to make a sequel to South of Midnight. I feel like there is enough of a solid foundation here that they could easily build off of it and make an even bigger and better sequel, and maybe even explore the folklore of the American South much further than they did in this game, or hell, even focus on a different part of America entirely, like maybe a New England setting with mythical creatures like the Mothman or the Wendigo, like what Bethesda previously explored in a game like Fallout 76. I just think you could do some very interesting things with a potential sequel to this game. I will say South of Midnight is worth playing through at least once if you can find it on sale, and honestly, truly, if you have an existing Game Pass membership, I really do think that's the best way for you to experience this game. South of Midnight, for the very first episode of Realm Reviews, is going to be scoring a B-. It's a good game with some flaws that might hinder your experience, but if you can look past those, I can easily recommend this game to you if you're looking for a really solid and immersive, original single-player game that doesn't take a long time to reach completion. Like I mentioned, it just took me barely about 12 hours to get through. Or if you're just a huge fan or have any interest at all in Southern folklore. Thank you so much for watching my very first properly critical review on this channel. You know, in the past, I would usually always try to find the positives in most games I play, and I would say that I still do, but once again, I've reached a point now where I do think it's beneficial, not just to me, but also to you, the audience, for me to not hold back and really try to critically examine the games that we're all playing together in a way that makes sense to me and hopefully makes sense to all of you. If I did somehow convince you to check out South of Midnight based on my opinion, number one, thank you. It means my opinion actually means something to somebody. And number two, leave a comment down below with your own thoughts on this review and South of Midnight, whether it's a game you're wanting to play, whether you've played it already, or whether it's just not at all for you, which is completely valid. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed, or a dislike, also completely valid. Consider subscribing to the channel for more game reviews in the future. I'm already thinking of what other titles I'd like to cover moving forward. And also, do be sure to hit the notification bell so you always know when my newest video is available. And remember that the outsider walks among us. I'll see y'all next time.